Page says, I want to let you know, I got the call from Benny Moten. I love you all dearly, but I'm going. And to them, he was selling out. And as he was leaving, he said, I want you guys to know I'll always be a blue devil. And Eddie said, you'll always be a black bastard. So that's an Eddie Durham story. But anyway, just to cut to the chase now, eventually Basie, Jimmy Rushing, Eddie Durham, they all go over to Benny Moten's band. And there, in 1932, they make this series of recordings, kind of a famous series of recording in Camden, New Jersey. The band came east. They influenced Duke Ellington, they influenced Don Redman, they were doing all the doo-wah brass. I'm a firm believer that by the time you hear Duke Ellington's record of It Don't Mean a Thing from 1932, that a lot of that plunger stuff, they say, well, Benny Moten didn't record till 1932 with that doo-wah stuff. There was a lot of influence going on outside of what was on records. I mean, these bands were playing in the theaters, they heard one another and all this kind of stuff. Well, anyway, in 1932, they make these classic records, Blue Room and New Orleans and Toby and Milenberg Joys, all these brilliant Eddie Durham things. And they are, light years ahead of what anybody else is doing. Now, eventually he goes from there into Cab Calloway's band. He told me he stayed in Cab's band about 2 nights because he said it was all Cab Calloway showing off, and at that point he wasn't featuring the band. So Eddie told me he left one night. He left his instruments. He left everything on the stand and left. He was that kind of guy. Let's finish with talking about his work for Jimmy Lunsford, which was a great band, one of the great showman bands, and you can see Eddie with the band on film. It wasn't a band. The thing about the Basie band, as everyone knows, and this goes back to your comments about those records with Lester Young that you hadn't heard before, which is that the thing about the Basie band that was different than any other big band was Basie thought of it like a small group with brilliant soloists. And so there was an emphasis in the recordings. You never heard from Ellington or Goodman or Lunsford or any of the top bands of that era. None of them would start with 2 or 3 courses with the rhythm section. Just the rhythm section and a horn, and then the band comes in. Never. Plus all the band leaders wanted to be like, it's my band, and I'm going to play every. So it was a totally radical concept. Now what happens is, if you listen to the arrangements before Eddie joins, the arrangements he wrote when he was there, and the arrangements afterwards, it becomes so obvious to you that all the other arrangements, as good as they are, they sound like this in terms of the tessitura. There's a word for you. No, but seriously,
it's a good one.
The range, it is, it sounds, I could make a lot of jokes, but what's the point? It sounds like this. The band's range is here. And Earl Warren used to talk about this all the time, when Eddie's arrangements sounded like this.
Right.
He expanded the range, lower notes. If you listen to those records, excuse me, I always sneeze when I say tessitura. Sorry. Okay, but anyway,
Too much tessitura.
you in the sauce. But what happens is you can hear Eddie on Topsy, on a lot of records. If you listen very carefully, you'll hear he's playing low pedal notes on the trombone, an octave, like what a bass trombone would play. So not only did he expand the range, but he expanded the orchestration and the mixing of the instruments that allowed the overtones to ring in a certain kind of way that they didn't ring in the other arrangements. And it's like night and day, man. If you were to listen to 10 of the other arrangements, and then all of a sudden listen to one each, oh my God, it's like an accordion that went like this. When we were in Buck Clayton's band, Buck Clayton had the same kind of thing. Buck wrote beautifully. And one of the things about his band was that's not captured like on a score page. If you're going to analyze one of his arrangements, okay, there it is, and it's great. It's Buck Clayton. It's brilliant. But when you hear it, and this is when I began to ask, arrangers or composers or whatever. I'm a decomposer. No, but seriously, what I would ask them was, what is it? And maybe James Chirillo or someone told me, or Jerry Dodgen. They said, as seemingly non-complex as Buck's voicings are.
Right.
And this is, what's that old saying? Complex in its simplicity and simple in its complexity. He's a genius.
Right.
Because he picks these notes, and all of a sudden the band goes like,
That's right.
Mm-hmm. If it's in tune.
If it's in tune.
If it's in tune.
Because he was a perfectionist.
Oh, yeah.
You could hear his soul. And get here is immediately within a few bars. You know, that's Buck Clayton.
Yeah.
Same with Eddie.
Yeah. Now, not only did he arrange like that, but as Keith said, you know, excuse me, Dr. Wiki said, his guitar playing on this famous 2 record sessions for Commodore Records, John Hammond had produced a session of Eddie on the guitar with Freddie Green, Walter Page, and Joe Jones, and Buck Clayton on the trumpet. And they recorded 4 or 5 tracks, and he thought that the label he was producing for, which was Brunswick Records, would issue it. And he took them to record, he recorded it, took them to them, and said, sorry, we don't like it, we don't want to do it, for whatever reason. So he went to the owner of a small record label named Milt Gabler, who's Billy Crystal's uncle, and, Billy Crystal wasn't alive then. What's the point? He had his own little small jazz record label. And he said, man, will you put these out? And Milt Gabler, to his eternal credit, said, I'll put them out, but I'll tell you what, I want to do another session, and because there's only 3 good tunes from that record they needed 4. I'll tell you what, you give me that one, we'll do another session, but I want to add Lester Young. And then we'll have a total of 5 records or something like that. That's how the record date came about. And like Keith said, there are things on those records, you know, too many times when people talk about the evolution of jazz, we talk about harmony. Like somehow you get a slide ruler and you look at the high notes of extensions of a chord, and a lot of young players, even when we were coming up, thought about it like that. You know what I mean? Unless you play these things, you know, there's 15 ways to be so modern and innovative that aren't in a ruler of a chord,
Right.
but that are conceptual. So Eddie played stuff on these records. When you listen to him, man, I mean, I've written quite a bit about them, as has Dan, actually. You should read what Dan wrote about them. What's the point? He does things that no other guitar player ever did. And in a sense, in my estimation, this is the kind of thing that a writer or critic says that you want to punch him in the face. Okay. But I'll make one of these like pontifical statements, you know, just to argue. In a way, he's much more, in his own way, he's just as or even more creative than Charlie Christian. Now, sometimes he's thought of as kind of an antique figure. Well, Eddie Durham, he played kind of and then Charlie Christian came out with these Lenny Tristano, these Lester Young lines that are 8 miles long and so technically perfect. No, Eddie didn't play the guitar like that. He didn't. But he had a concept that was like a brilliant orchestrator. And when you listen to the way he plays on these Kansas City 6 records, he's playing chords, he's playing sounds. All Charlie Christian, he died when he was 25 years old, so we'll never, but I mean, yeah, chunk, it's great. It's chunk, and occasionally from Charlie Christian, and this has to do with Eddie Durham too, and Texas. Let's not forget McAuliffe, I'm trying to remember his first name, the guitarist with the Bob Wills and the Texas Playboys. Leon McAuliffe. Because if you really want to understand Eddie, you got to put in that Western swing, and those guys, there's a lot of stuff flowing back and forth, you know, just to summarize. So when you listen to those records, I knew those records, and I'll tell you a story afterwards about how the first music I heard when I was high was those records, okay? And as I came to understand that record, I didn't realize until 10 years later that Eddie's playing the trombone in that session.
Oh, wow.
Because there's 3-part harmony, you know, but you don't know it. It's almost like Duke Ellington. Like sometimes supposedly Duke Ellington would say, okay, to the trombone player, I want you to go back in the studio and face the wall. And then the record would come out and people would say, what the hell is that? You couldn't tell. And on that record, Eddie plays some trombone harmony parts that are almost inaudible. And then he picks up the guitar and he does all these odd things. And then even if you were to transcribe his solos on those records, man, I mean the rhythm, it's strange, you know? I asked him once about Lester Young. He said that he'd be with Lester Young in a hotel room just jamming, and he said, you know, Lester, and Eddie would play the strangest chord on the guitar, and Lester would just go bing, 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 bing.
Those ears.
He was an ear player.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah. Anyway, so,
Anything else? I'd like to add one
It's
thing.
been really wonderful. If
Let
you
me
got
add
anything
one thing.
Okay.
Do you want to ask another?
No, go ahead.
Did you turn that on?
Are we done? We want to thank you guys so much. This was
Thank
just
you.
incredible.
Yeah, this is